Welcome to the Codependency Surviving Cluster B Relationships Podcast. Want and need to understand codependency? Want to heal from both codependency and from a BPD or NPD relationship of any type? This podcast is for you. Counselor and codependency recovery coach AJ Mahari has 33 years experience helping people heal from codependency family of origin woundedness and recover from cluster B relationships. Sessions can be purchased and booked at ajmahari.ca. And now, here's your host, AJ Mahari.
And just before I begin this podcast episode, could I please just remind you that if you find this content helpful, please do rate it with 5 stars, because the more people that do that, the more people like yourself that can find this content helpful will be able to find it. I'd super appreciate that. Please accept my apologies in advance here that I had a little bit of microphone trouble in this episode, and my air conditioner was in the background, too hot to turn it off, and I guess it's developed a funny little noise all on its own. So usually the sound quality of my episodes in this podcast are much better, but I hope this will suffice and that you don't find it too distracting, that the sound quality isn't as high as normal. My apologies. And now let's dive into an episode that, sound quality aside, I think will be very informative and helpful for you. Is codependency really an addiction? Well, today we're going to dive into this very important topic, an often misunderstood question. In my 35 years of working with people to help them heal from their codependency and break the trauma bond with somebody with BPD or NPD or comorbidity both, we are working to heal the aspect of the fantasy bond, which is part of the trauma bond. And for many, after having first had a trauma bonded relationship to a narcissist and then a borderline, or a borderline and then a narcissist. And for some people, maybe you've had, I've had clients who've had a relationship with a couple of different narcissists at different times, and then a couple of different people with BPD, etc. So it's not always just one relationship in adulthood for people with a cluster B person. And often people have a cluster B parent when they have codependency. Not always, but often. A core aspect of codependency, I've explained often, is that when one has codependency, it also means that emotionally one has a dysfunctional relationship to and with oneself. The concept of codependency as an addiction is widely discussed among some therapists, some researchers, though they don't really have any conclusions on that, and the online echo chamber of, I don't know, anybody and their mother or whatever, and in recovery communities. But it's not officially. Codependence is not officially classified as an addiction. It is not the same as substance abuse disorder in the DSM-5. And remember, the DSM working group, DSM-3 working group, said no to the inclusion of a proposal of codependent personality disorder, leaving codependency in a rather no man's limbo type place in terms of people's understanding. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things said about codependency out there that aren't accurate or correct and aren't really helpful. And so it can be really difficult for people to even try to conceptualize at first, what does codependency mean? So how can you know if that is something that you're experiencing or not? And if this is the first episode of this podcast that you've ever listened to, please go back to episodes 1 through 8, which are all explaining in immense detail what codependency really is. Is codependency really an addiction? So many people who are healing from relationships, especially with someone who had BPD or all the patterns and traits have said, wonder why you feel, quote, hooked, unquote. Why can't you let go even when you know the relationship is hurting you? You know you're losing yourself. You know, you might even realize now how you've abandoned yourself. Maybe you don't know why yet, because sometimes that's really unconscious, but you may even feel like you're addicted to this person or the relationship dynamic itself, the trauma bond that holds within it the fantasy bond and the betrayal bond. So part one here, defining codependency and its addictive nature. Codependency isn't officially classified as an addiction in the DSM-5, like alcohol or drug dependency, but emotionally and behaviorally, codependency acts in strikingly similar ways to addiction. Emotional dependency within codependency often involves a deep and compulsive focus on another person, needing their approval, needing their validation, or even welcoming sort of unconsciously the chaos. And a lot of people with codependency think that that's how you gain your feelings of worthiness, your feelings of being alive, maybe even connection. Might have been rooted for you in some kind of chaos in childhood. So of course attachment and lack of secure attachment plays a big role in this as well. And the quote fixer unquote role. Codependents feel drawn to fix, to rescue, or to save others. This creates a cycle of highs and lows, much like the cycle of intoxication and withdrawal. And people with codependency are drawn to be people pleasers, trained actually early in childhood, really, or through your teen years, to be fixers and people pleasers. And you kind of learn in childhood somehow, in various different family dynamics, that in order to hope to get what you need, you have to first satisfy the needs of another person or a parent. Codependency has been described as a kind of addiction to control, addiction to people, and an addiction to approval. And if you're hearing this going, I don't think I'm like that, what you need to think about is that a lot of this goes on unconsciously, and people are not aware of it. And that's one of the more difficult aspects of codependency, for people to realize that, hey, maybe this does apply to me. But a lot of people, of course, just sort of bristle at the word. So it's important that you think more about this. The addiction to control, to people, and to approval, and to externalizing out your needs, which is usually learned in childhood, it's not about substances, but about being needed, about that emotional rush when someone relies on you, or when you believe you're keeping a relationship alive. And of course, when you believe you're keeping a relationship, a toxic, unhealthy relationship alive, especially with somebody with BPD, untreated especially, then you might not realize or might not have realized how much you're abandoning yourself and how much unconsciously you are repeating your childhood in your adult life, and how that's not going to augur well for you in terms of mental health and healthy relationships and actually getting the kind of love and intimacy, emotional intimacy, etc., that you really deserve. But you have to be able to really accept that. So people with codependency often end up with people with BPD or NPD or maybe other issues who aren't really emotionally available, because you might not realize this, right? But you have probably also learned in childhood, when you have codependency from childhood, that it's not really that trustworthy, or you would feel maybe scared, not consciously, but somewhere inside, if somebody was really, truly reciprocal and mutual and healthier. Part two, how codependency behaves like an addiction. I'm going to break this down, how codependency mirrors the brain and behavior patterns that are seen in addiction. Well, the first way is the brain's reward system. When you help someone, or overhelp someone, or overgive to someone, you feel needed, your brain releases dopamine. This feel-good hormone reinforces your behavior, much like how a drug creates a high. The second reason that codependency mirrors the brain and behavior that is seen in addiction is tolerance and escalation. Over time, being helpful or accommodating isn't enough. You feel compelled to do more and more and more to keep the connection alive, no matter what, even when it is it's disconnecting you from you. And the third reason why codependency mirrors the brain and behavior that is seen in addiction: withdrawal symptoms. When a codependent relationship ends, or a BPD relationship, more to the point, right? Or when your fixing isn't accepted, or when your fixing is now being rejected, it just isn't working, you can experience anxiety, panic, intrusive thoughts, and even physical symptoms of distress. Just like, not exactly, but very similar to the detox from a drug. And the fourth reason that codependency mirrors the brain and behavior patterns that are seen in addiction is loss of control. Even when you know a relationship is unhealthy, leaving or setting boundaries feels impossible. The compulsion to stay, to try harder, to do better, to blame yourself more, to believe that it's within your control, because if you could just be better and just do better and just try harder, well, this overrides all your rational thought. And often people with codependency are doing this. Again, this loss of control and your response to it isn't so consciously obvious to people at first, or for quite a while. And the fourth reason codependency mirrors the brain and behavior patterns we see in addiction is obsession and fantasy. Codependents often obsess over the other person's behavior or approval, living in a constant mental loop of, how do I fix this? How do I make them love me? They do love me, don't they? Oh, what else can I do? How much more can I give? What's the matter now? Doesn't matter what's the matter now with the borderline. You're just trying to figure out how to make it okay again. How to make it okay again. Again and again and again and again. It's not very healthy and it doesn't really work. And so part 3 of codependency versus substance addiction. Although there's no physical substance involved, there can be for people, but I'm just saying generally, with codependency, there's not necessarily a physical substance addiction involved. Codependency is sometimes called an addiction to relationships or people. In many ways, the partner or loved one becomes the drug. For people with codependency, that borderline, that narcissist, that borderline comorbid narcissist is going to become like a drug to you. So then, why might that be, right? What is that about? Is your brain just set up in some wired craziness that, no, it has all to do with why you have codependency. It has all to do with what happened in your childhood. It's all to do with patterns you're repeating without the conscious awareness of where they come from and why you're doing what you're doing. And it's hurting you, what you're doing. Involved in codependency versus substance addiction here, we need to look at the emotional roller coaster in these relationships. With its highs of being validated and lows of rejection or abuse, it feeds the cycle because it is that chase that you might not be aware of, or you might know the terms for now, but it's a chase for intermittent reinforcement. The chase to feel like you fixed it and something's better now, and now that person, that borderline or narcissist is, well, not so much narcissist, but that borderline is now back in a sweet cycle, out of the mean cycle. And you feel like, oh, eureka, I've done it. I had the power and the control to do it. And so now you're back to the intermittent reinforcement of a good experience. It feeds the cycle. Every time it goes wrong, it goes bad, it's not working, you believe you can get back to that good feeling again. And trauma bonds, those deep, painful attachments, really unhealthy, toxic attachments that form from the very intermittent reinforcement I was just describing, of love and then neglect. Or, I love you, I hate you, right? I hate you, don't leave me. I love you, you're the greatest. Oh, now I'm not so sure because now you're the worst. And you don't like that part when you get devalued or, discarded or ghosted. But that sets up your emotional response within a trauma bond to chase for the intermittent reinforcement again, and then to feel like you fixed it again. But every time you might feel like you're getting some you might be getting some intermittent reinforcement, and you feel like you fixed a problem again with that person with BPD. You really haven't. But in the fantasy of it all, it seems like it. And this is the loop within a trauma bond with the fantasy bond within the trauma bond. This is why simply walking away or going no contact can feel nearly impossible for someone who is codependent. It's not weakness or stupidity. It's a learned survival pattern often rooted in childhood experiences of neglect, abandonment, or emotional abuse. And for many people with codependency, and I work with clients regularly, and I've been doing so for 35 years, I have clients that still come to me and they don't realize that they have a parent with BPD or NPD or something's going on there. Because often when we're stuck with some childhood trauma or adverse experience, we tend to want, a lot of people do, tend to want to see the parent as well. You know, they're kind of crazy, but whatever. And so sometimes when I'm working with clients, it really comes up that, you know, mom or dad is a borderline or a narcissist or what have you. And clients sometimes don't really want to like look at that. Then when we look at that, they're like, well, yeah. And then they start to see all the parallels between, you know, what you've been going through with that borderline woman or that borderline man and what you went through with a parent. And so this behavior, you know, whatever we don't heal inside, it will keep on repeating itself within us and our relationships. Part 4, recovery from the, quote, addiction, unquote, of codependency. The good news is, just like with any addiction, recovery is absolutely possible. Although codependency isn't a straight up absolute addiction, healing starts when I work with clients. First, we work to, often people have to tell me a lot about the relationship, what's going on, all those struggles, right? With the borderline or the narcissist or comorbidity both, or maybe something else involved. But the first thing is, it's important to acknowledge the pattern and to see where it connects back to childhood. Recognizing that you are giving more than is healthy is the first courageous step, often for people, after usually talking about the borderline quite a bit, but you know. And the second part of recovery from codependency is to detach with love, or some people detach in anger, some people detach out of kind of like momentary or that time hate, or some people detach out of the desperation of I just can't handle this anymore. But the important thing is to detach. This means separating your sense of worth from someone else's needs or moods while still coming from a healthy distance. Or that's up for grabs, really. Because there might not be any healthy distance with a borderline for you. And the third step in this, and this is not like in a certain order, these are not the only steps, but you need to rebuild your sense of self is another part of this healing and recovery from codependency and or BPD relationship or NPD relationship, a trauma bonded relationship. So rebuilding your sense of self, like who are you outside of the relationship? And that also goes back into I work with clients on family of origin and what it was like growing up in your family and what were your parents like and how many siblings and what happened in your life, etc. Because we then look back to not only who are you outside of the relationship, but who were you sort of taught to be in childhood versus who are you really? Because people with codependency, remember, it's a dysfunctional relationship to and with self, and it's not your fault, but it's something that you really will benefit from working through to heal. And also looking at reclaiming, rebuilding your sense of self. What do you need? What brings you peace and joy and meaning? And so that comes to a question often with clients of who do you think you are? Who are you, though, really? And then we look at that as well. And there's much more involved. And the fourth thing that I've talked a lot about, and I'll mention that's an important part in recovery from codependency and any toxic relationship, is healing the inner child. So much of codependency stems from unmet needs in childhood. Inner child healing, self-compassion, and self-parenting are key to breaking trauma-bonded, toxic, dysfunctional relationships, but those type of attachments that don't serve you well at all. I hope that was helpful and made some sense, because the answer to is codependency really an addiction? Maybe we could say yes and no, right? The experience and the behavior that you will be involved with or have been is the answer to yes. But the actuality of like addiction, like a substance, no. But then the way you feel emotionally, it's very similar. So I hope that this was helpful. And I'll have more coming on this podcast soon.
You've been listening to the Codependency Surviving Cluster B Relationships podcast with your host, AJ Mahari. AJ hopes her information is helpful. And if you resonate with and want to work with AJ, please go to ajmahari.ca to purchase and book a session or sessions. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.